It's now 10:06 and time for the Saturday special with Michael Zwerling.
Griffin Queener.
Yes, that's me.
May I ask you a personal question?
Sure, go for it.
Have you ever been homeless?
No, I don't think so.
Would you like to be homeless? I mean, just as an obvious. Not. I don't mean to ask a stupid question, but just for a while, just to see what it was like.
Yeah.
You would.
Yeah.
Maybe our guest today can help you.
Okay.
All right. Now, in the meantime, let's just start our program here, okay?
Morning.
No, not morning. Not morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's more like
A brighter
it.
day is here. Good morning. May we bring you cheer.
We've got time, we've got tunes, we've got time, tunes, and temperature.
Get up and go, it's today you know on KSCO Radio.
Good morning, Monterey Bay. And not wanting to let any other part of the world feel left out. Good morning to the rest of the world. From your favorite radio station, KSCO in Santa Cruz. If we're not your favorite radio station, we should be. Get with the program. We're going to be on for the next couple hours with a pretty good topic and guest.
Good morning. Now stay right here on KSCO Radio.
But before we get going with the great topic and guest, Dave Michaels from the Dave Cave is here. Hi, Dave Michaels from the Dave Cave.
Hello, MZ. I was going to say good morning, but the people could be listening to this on the rebroadcast, so I will just say hello.
Well, I think that would be okay.
All right.
Good
morning.
I got fired from my first job in radio for saying have a nice day, or if you're calling from outer Mongolia, have a nice night. They didn't like that one bit. I was on the snow phone. I recorded, an outgoing message for the ski report.
Right.
I mean, don't you think that's pretty humorless on the part of
I think that's pretty good.
But humorless on the part of the guy who fired me.
Sure, absolutely. What a jerk.
Do you know who that guy was?
Who?
John Hamilton. John Hamilton, until KGO melted down, was their travel guy in the, he did some sort of a show.
Okay.
There are people who are listening now who know who John Hamilton is.
All right.
And I always thought that I would run into him someday and punch him in the nose.
Run into him with their car.
No, I didn't want to do that, and I did run into him one day, and I didn't punch him in the nose, but I reminded him what he had done to me that scarred me for life.
Right.
And he didn't. He said, "Oh, that doesn't sound like something I would do." I said, "It's something you did. It really is something you did." So anyhow, what's happening? I mean, you always have good deals, especially if you like the way someone parts their hair.
Right. Well, MZ, we got pretty wiped out during the sale last week, but we do still have some good stuff out there. We have a few cans of BTT left. I have the on-the-go Healthy Start Pack. So these are the Healthy Start Pack, but in the vitamin in the little packet form, so you don't have to carry around a bunch of bottles with you. Just carry your bottle of water and just down them, and super easy to take. We've got Arthrodex as well, Glucogel. We've got.
Is it illegal for a person to take Arthrodex?
I don't know. You know what? The way it smells, MZ, it smells like it would taste pretty delicious. It smells like beef jerky.
So you have been tempted.
Oh yeah.
But you haven't done it.
No, I think Mariah tried it. I think she's dipped her finger in there and tried it. I'll have to ask her.
Wow.
Her and Mikey do goofy things like that.
It really is an amazing product.
It is.
For years and years, when I was living in the East Bay, I would be out on a walk and I would see people walking with a dog that obviously has arthritis. It's very painful. And I feel really bad about that. I said, this dog needs Arthrodex. And they said, what? Not the dog. The dog didn't say that. The owner of the dog said that.
Right.
And I said, yeah, Arthrodex, that's a product it's an additive. You add it to the food of the animal. And it doesn't have to be a dog. It could be a cat, or it could be a zebra, or a giraffe. They have arthritis too, right? And it makes them a lot better, amazingly quickly. And I said, I'm not just telling you that to sell you that. If you give me your name and address, if you're not too far away, I'll drop a sample of it on your. And at that time, they didn't have the samples like they do now. My sample was a whole canister of the stuff. You know, it sort of costs. Anyhow, I felt so bad for the aminal that I did, and almost every time they would call, but I said, you have to, if I do this, you have to promise you'll use it, you know, you'll try it and not just let it sit there, you know, because it costs me money, you know. So they said, yeah, and they did it, and almost always they got back in touch with me and said, that stuff is amazing. I want to buy it. And then the aminals lived forever.
Well, we've got it here, MZ. We've got it here at the Dave Cave. I'll be out there till 2 today.
I was only kidding about the aminals leave, because we don't want people to use that against us.
No.
The aminals don't I don't think anything that we produce, I can't make the claim that it will extend your life to infinity, much as I would like to.
Oh, yeah.
We can't do that.
Are you sure? Because I just made a commercial saying that this stuff will make you live forever.
Oh, okay. Well,
I was going to play it during George Nori. I think we might get some people.
That'd be great.
Fall for it.
Okay, Dave,
all right,
thank
MZ, I'll
you.
be out there till 2. You got a great guest, MZ. Boy, you're on a roll with your guests and your topics. This is going to be great.
It was so cool. What I kept getting. I guess I got on my guest's email list somehow, and he was sending. I was the recipient of more than one email in the last week that made me think, oh my God, I am a fool. Talk about looking a gift horse in the mouth.
You know, I don't know how political you're going to get, but as I'm watching the Democratic debates, everybody keeps saying healthcare is the #1 issue in this country. Healthcare. And I say that is not it, man. What you guys are going to talk about today is the #1 issue on Americans' minds, and on the majority of Americans' minds, because the majority of Americans live along the coast, and that's where this problem is huge, especially here in California. Nobody cares about healthcare. That's boring. Put me to sleep. What we're worried about is losing our jobs and being. I'll let you guys handle it, but this is going to be a great topic, MZ. I'm so stoked. This is great.
Okay, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Griffin Queener. I will introduce Keith McHenry, co-founder, right? Co-founder of Food Not Bombs, right?
Yep.
Tell us what food. You are what can legitimately be characterized as a true activist, right?
Yeah.
We do not have many true activists as guests at the KSC and KSCO.
That's correct.
Once in a while, we have nothing against activists.
Right.
I would love to be one myself.
Yeah.
Maybe you can help me.
Well, I want to say you are the home of the homeless.
The home of the homeless?
Yeah. KSCO is home of the homeless, just like in Santa Monica, the station there, because people living on the streets of Santa Cruz come to me every week telling me about something they heard on KSCO.
Really?
You are the and they don't tell me that they heard something on NPR or BBC or something else. People that live on the streets of Santa Cruz County listen to KSCO.
Wow.
You are the home of the homeless.
So listen, we got to get serious now because it's a very serious topic. I've been very flippant, thus far in the program, and I don't want to make light of something that, as Dave said, is a very serious topic. You've dedicated your life to fixing that or helping.
Correct.
And making it so that people who are in that position, many of whom through no fault of their own, it just stuff happens in people's lives. And you are a saint as far as I'm concerned, because you are an advocate for people who need advocacy more than anybody that I can think of in a particular group.
Yes.
So the Food Not Bombs thing, which I believe you co-founded some 30 plus years ago.
Yeah, it'll be 39 years ago.
Whoa.
We'll be celebrating our 40th anniversary at San Lorenzo Park on May 24th with live bands and music, and you could potentially do a live broadcast on our 40th anniversary.
What day is that?
That is May 24th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Food Not Bombs started in Massachusetts, not California. Am I right?
Correct. It started
That's
in
where
Cambridge
you
and
happen to
Boston.
live,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I was an
How-
art student there.
And tell us the story.
Okay, well, there's three parts to this story. The first one was I was a produce worker at Bread and Circus in Central Square, which is today a Whole Foods. And I felt I was one of the first produce workers when that store opened, and I was mortified that so much produce was being thrown away because it was organic.
Like literally thrown away.
Yeah, I was hauling
away
it-
to the dump.
Yeah, I would take it out to the dumpster, and then this young, scrawny little guy came up to the back. His name was Chris Worthington, who is now a city councilor, or was a city councilor in Berkeley. He lived in a Catholic worker house, I believe it was, called Broadway House, or like a little collective. And he said, "You have any food you're throwing away?" And I said, "Wow, yeah, I've got a lot of food here." And I had 4 cases of produce. And at that time, a lot of people didn't know about Fuji apples or all the other unusual foods that we're now used to. And so they wouldn't buy it. And I would have to throw it out. And so I said, "You could take like the 4 cases of food if you want." He said, "Well, we don't need that. We're only 12 people. So I said, "Well, this is a great idea. I'll take it to the housing projects, which were about 3 blocks away from the store." And so I was delivering the food to them after work every day before I went to class. And the people on the steps there that I was giving the food to said, "Well, we got to talking about this brand new building across the street in this vacant lot." And they said, "Well, that's a place where they design nuclear weapons." And I'm like, whoa, that's intense. And so that's where I got the idea for the name Food Not Bombs. And then the second thing that happened is I had a history professor named Howard Zinn. And he wrote a People's History of the United States. And he was up at these protests at Seabrook Nuclear Power Station. And so I started working with Clamshell Alliance and going up to the protests. And then a friend of mine, Brian Feigenbaum, was arrested at the May 24th, 1980 occupation attempt at Seabrook. And it was that afternoon when we got him, we got a wealthy person to bail him out of jail, and we realized we need to pay the person back. So we thought on the way home to Boston that we should do bake sales to raise money. So we started a defense committee, and we did our first bake sale, and we didn't really sell anything. And so we kept doing that, and oddly enough, I had a moving company called Smooth Move, and I moved this family, and yeah, it's my business.
Was your business?
Yeah, I had many little businesses, and then so in that, from that I moved this family, and they had a big poster that said, "Wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed, and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber?" And there's a lot of controversy about at that time about the $1,500 bolt that you could get at Ace Hardware for like 5 cents, because it was military. So anyway, we went to the Army Navy surplus store in Central Square, bought military uniforms, went out with our baked goods and our sign, and said we were trying to buy a bomber. And while we didn't make any more money, we had a lot of interest in our table. And so that became part of our idea of, and by now we had adopted the name Food Not Bombs. And then the third thing was we were protesting the investment policies of the Bank of Boston, particularly their investment in nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And the board of directors of Bank of Boston were also on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon and General Electric and so on. And so what we were going to dress up as hobos and do a soup line outside the stockholders meeting on that would be March 26th of 1981. And we decided that as we had this huge pot of soup and all this food, and we were like, wow, it's only 8 of us. We didn't do much. We didn't do a lot of outreach to get a bunch of friends to dress as hobos. So we thought, well, why don't we go to the shelter, which was the Pine Street Inn. And so at midnight, I go there, and they let me in, and I give a speech to the guys and sitting around on the. At that time, it was just a room with tile floors and tile benches, and the guys are going, oh, this is great, a protest like the 60s, way to go, man. And the next day, a line of maybe 50 people showed up from that conversation, and it looked like
Just from people talking to other people.
Yeah, just the people in that shelter.
Broadcast or anything. Yeah.
No, and then they, at the end of that meal, so we were getting the middle finger from stockholders, and some stockholders were praising us, and business people were shocked what we were doing because it's right across from South Station, where a lot of people come into town, and it's at the outside. It was outside the Federal Reserve Bank, and on Atlantic Avenue in in the South End of Boston, or not the South End, but down that part, and then the guys eating with us said, you should just do this every day. There's no food for homeless people in this town. And so that night, when we're cleaning up from everything, we said, let's just quit our jobs and do nothing but collect food and feed people and do street theater around food. And that's what it started.
How could you weren't independently wealthy. How could you? I mean, I'm assuming that.
No, I was definitely not. And I had been homeless already by this time.
How did you have the guts to quit your job? Where would the money come from?
Well, we were young.
Even if you're homeless, you need something. You need money for your cell phone. Well, there weren't cell phones then.
Yeah,
I know you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, we were like, I was 21, 22 at this time. And I just had this idealistic idea, and as my other 7 friends, that if we did something good money would come to us.
Yeah, somehow you'd get by. Yeah. I found that to be true too. That's true. Yeah.
Well, here's the interesting thing. So we rented this house from Joan Blount. And her husband had been, she was widowed, but her husband had been the head of the French department at Harvard. And so we're supposed to pay $600 a month. We actually raised enough to give the $1,200 to get in. And then we just started because we were working at that time when we rented this house, so we could pay that. Plus we had some side businesses like the Smooth Move and selling pot and the normal stuff you do as a person with no money. And so after 6 months of that, Joan calls us and said, oh, I got to have lunch with you. And so we have a lunch, and we figure it's the eviction lunch. And she goes,
It's the opposite.
Yeah, so she goes look, you haven't paid any money since you moved in, but I go to these cocktail parties and all these events, and everybody just raves about what you're doing. My friends just think it's the most amazing thing. But obviously 600 is too much, so why don't you, I'll lower it to 400, but you have to pay next month. And so we all went back and got jobs, and that ended up being a blessing because I got an evening job as the cook at Passeum's Coffee House, and that's where I got to become acquaintances with Allen Ginsberg and with Odetta and Joan Baez and all these people in the music industry, and it was a really wonderful experience. And then, from then on, and then around that time, I also was starting an advertising agency, graphic design business, and I ended up not long after that landing the Boston Red Sox, the Celtics, the New England Patriots. I got John DeLauria Hair Salon. I ended up winning Clio Awards for my ads in Mademoiselle and Vogue and so on. And I ended up with renting half a floor of an office building in Kenmore Square and hired 12 employees.
All while you were doing the Food Not
Bombs. While I'm doing the Food Not Bombs. I never stopped it. Yeah. But by being self-employed, I had a lot of freedom to have my own schedule. So I just kept doing the Food Not Bombs, and I did free graphic design for like nonprofit groups and so on, and I did that for many years.
And do you still do any of that?
I do graphic design, but I do it right now. I'm doing it for the Union of the Santa Cruz Homeless Union, the California Union of the Homeless.
There's a union of homeless.
Yeah,
people.
we are just now reestablishing the National Union of the Homeless, and I just got back from a training in Manhattan, and where the leaders of homeless unions in California mostly, but also in other places, Boston and so on, had a 12-day training with like amazing people who came to this place called the People's Forum in Midtown near Hell's Kitchen, and we. It was just really phenomenal, and so we're going to do trainings here in California for all the locals, and we're starting locals. And our local will be doing tomorrow outside of Costco. We're doing an underwear, sock, and other camping equipment drive, which we do periodically outside, where we're urging people to go in and buy, obviously no one wants used underwear, so but underwear is one of the most important things for people living on the street, because you can imagine you're wandering around all day, every day, there's no way to wash underwear, and you end up, getting rashes and so on, and one of the most requested things is underwear. But the other thing is we're getting a donation of sleeping bags, but we need more sleeping bags, because right now it's, people are caught off guard by how cold it is, and coats and those kind of things. And we've had like we've only done it for like 2 weeks, and we've had really good success. But and then we have a weekly meeting of people that live outside come to our 5 o'clock every Sunday meeting at the post office at Food Not Bombs. And then we do the meal Saturdays and Sundays from 4 to 6 at the downtown post office. So,
do you use the honor system? In other words, if someone says I'm home and I want to take advantage of your free food that you give, have you ever run across people who are not, and who have plenty of, but they're just misers? I mean, and they.
Well, we have 3 principles that we eventually came to agreement on in 1992, which is that the food is always vegetarian or vegan and free to anyone, rich or poor, drunk or sober. So
really?
We actually.
So you don't have. There's no ID,
No,
to prove that you're homeless or anything.
No, in fact, our goal is to have homeless and housed people eat together, so that people become friends with homeless people if they are housed, and they learn about the reality of people living on the streets. And Dave is slightly is right that the big issue is homelessness in America, but healthcare also. I've been homeless 5 times, and it was always I think in every case, maybe one case was not that. One case was I was homeless not from a healthcare crisis. That was in Kansas City in '99. But I've been homeless the other 4 times from health emergencies, where I end up losing my job, and I end up losing my house, and I end up on the streets.
Was it always a rented house, or did you ever own a house that you lost?
I lost one owned house, and the others were rentals. Yeah. And when I lost my own I restored a beautiful 1935 adobe house in Tucson, Arizona, and I spent like maybe a year and a half like restoring it. It was the love of, I just loved restoring it, and I built this huge porch roof on the backside and everything. But I ended up getting valley fever while working on. I was putting in a fence, because some people living in my backyard started. I was okay with people living in my backyard, but they were starting to build fires, and I urged them not to. And then it turned out some the homeless guys that were living back there, they were cool, but they graduated and went on somewhere. But then some young kids started building fires, so I was building a fence. I got dust in my lungs from my neighbor was a hoarder, and her belongings were falling into my yard, and I was putting it back into her yard, and that triggered fibromyalgia, and then I spent the next 14 years like horribly suffering from that, and but I lost that place as a result. And 9/11 happened, and then that's when I got banned from working in the United States. So I got fired.
What's that about?
Yeah, well, I'm a founder of Food Not Bombs, so it turned out in 1988, in Thanksgiving, we discovered that we were America's most hardcore terrorist group, according to the National Guard. There was
the United States?
Yeah, the National Guard had workshops on Thanksgiving weekend of 1988 where they featured Food Not Bombs. And how we found this out was that people would be at the airport going home at Thanksgiving, coming back to San Francisco, and they're wearing the Food Not Bombs button. And
It's a good thing, right?
yeah, we think it's a good thing. And what they were, so then when 9/11 happened, then I was put on the terrorist watch list, and then I was blacklisted from employment in the United States. And so they fired me from United Way at that time. And then I got another job. I got fired right away from that. And then the third job, I got the woman.
Just because they found out you were on some government list.
Yeah, well, the government called them and told
said you
them,
better.
Yeah, that I was not allowed. My last job was with Sun Sounds Radio for the blind, and it was a 20-hour-a-week job, part-time job, and I was suffering from fibromyalgia at the time, trying to keep my act together. And the nice woman that managed it, she brought me in, and she was all nervous and upset, and she said, "You're doing a great job, but I got a call that you're on a blacklist and you're not allowed to work in the United States." And I was so stuck.
I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, they have blacklists for that kind of stuff. Yeah. So anyway, I've never been allowed to work since. Maybe I could. So that gave me a lot of. I was sick, homeless, had a lot of free time. So I just did Food Not Bombs. I still did Food Not Bombs all through that time in Tucson and down at Scott and Congress, and then eventually was suggested by a friend of mine that I start to tour because I couldn't. And so then the way I made my living for the years after that was I spoke at colleges, and I'd arranged to get honorariums, and I lived in a van or a pickup truck originally, and then a van, and then I would drive around to North America in circles speaking at colleges about the history of Food Not Bombs, and that paid my bills, because by the time the check cleared, it was too late for the FBI and Homeland Security to block payments. So, so that's how I lived.
And what about if you're not allowed to have a job? I can't believe I'm even having this conversation, because it seems surreal to me. But does that mean that your skills as a graphic artist and as an advertising, because there's always a need for that.
Yeah,
if you're creative, have your own business and not worry about being on a blacklist for employment. I've never heard of that. Someone's got to help me with that. That just.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that by that time, I mean, I could make money doing graphic design, but I just became so involved in doing Food Not Bombs, and
somehow, as you said, the money comes.
Yeah. And so I just.
And do you live in a place now, or do you live in a vehicle now?
Well, I did get a place recently. I was squatting for a short while in Santa Cruz.
What does squatting mean?
I was in an abandoned building and living there. And then after I did that, I eventually got a room in an apartment shared with two young people, and then I eventually graduated to my own little room.
It doesn't sound like there's in your past at all, wife and kids, or it's.
Well, I had two wives in my life, and the first wife was we were together for 17 years. She was amazing that she put up with all the crazy stuff that happened. So at one point in Boston, she was my office manager, and then eventually we got married. But she couldn't have kids, and we didn't have kids. And
you wanted to?
I didn't really care about that at that time. Eventually, I did. She mentioned that I would be a great father. But now I'm a father of essentially about 30,000 young people worldwide that do Food Not Bombs every week, and they're my children. And so, we're in 1,000 cities and over 65 countries. We've been doing disaster relief in Myanmar for the floods, and that's what we do.
Okay, so I said that you're an activist.
Mm-hmm.
being somebody who feeds the homeless is not my idea of being an activist. An activist is people who advocate for, to go to the city councils and the boards of supervisors to say, hey, you got to do this, you got to take better care of your people. It's just,
right.
We're human here,
Yeah.
So that's what activism is in my, is in your mind, is the activism just the act of collecting the food and distributing it to people who need it?
Well, no, because we have always have banners and signs that say food, not bombs. So the real solution to ending homelessness in the United States is to start spending money on things that people need. And we're not...
And just give it to them.
No, just to so for instance, if you funded higher education and more people were able to get into college and or trade schools and so on, that would be a super big help. There's also, healthcare is an issue. Like I say, I have a number of friends who are homeless because they got injured. I have one friend. He's unfortunately passed recently from cancer, but he lived at the post office in a wheelchair, and he worked at Sears in Capitola at the mall, and he was lifting a refrigerator. He was was going to put a refrigerator in a truck and deliver it to some place, but it wasn't in the box. It slipped and fell. He broke his back, and then and ended up addicted to OxyContin, and then just horribly suffered, and then lived on the street. He lost that job. He ended up losing his disability. Eventually, he lost, and then so he's just surviving outside. And
you say living at the post office?
Yeah, he lived in his wheelchair at the post office until he passed away. So, that's what happens. You find that a lot of the people that are living outside that are doing heroin are people that were employees that were injured at their job and ended up being after back surgery, and I know this. I had 2 back surgeries 2 years ago, and and I had to do like a very intense regimen to make sure I got off the pain medicine and was clean and sober. So. But it's if you're not organized and stuff, and you've lost everything, and you don't have a support system in your community, you can end up on the street, addicted to Oxy, and then you can't. It's horrible to get off of Oxy when you're outside in the cold, and so you may, and this is not the case for everybody. Some people are just idiots and start shooting heroin, but there are some people like that. Or I have another friend who I became friends with because he had a beautiful little dog, and he got injured. Engine fell on him while he was repairing an AT&T vehicle. He was the mechanic for the fleet, and then he ended up getting surgery, and then he ended up going into Oxy. He finally got off of that, but then he was in so much pain he started drinking, and then he just got out of rehab again. People often go to rehab 12, 15 times, but there's no instant access to, like Janus. They're not paying their employees enough.
Tell us who Janus is.
Janus is a local drug rehab place that's over on 7th, and they do a wonderful job. But the employees went out on strike recently because they're not paid even a living wage to be taking care of this major crisis that's hitting our city, hitting America. When on 9/11. And after 9/11, they announced they're going to go to war in Afghanistan. And I know from having fed people all through the crack epidemic, I go, uh-oh, now we're going to have a heroin epidemic. And sure enough, that's what happened. The poppy crops that used to be banned by the Taliban are now the largest ever in Afghan history since the Taliban came to power. And what happened? You eventually start getting heroin dumped into the United States, and then you got the pharmaceutical industry running their whole scams on Oxy and all that. It's chemical warfare. My grandfather my mother's father, was in Burma during World War II. He was responsible for, he was an Office of Strategic Services. He was in command of the air war particularly focused on Tokyo. He claimed to kill 5 million people. He probably only killed 1 million. He also told me that he intentionally was involved in organizing opium trade from Burma into the United States to flood particularly he told me, the black community with heroin so they wouldn't rise up. And his stated goal in that, and in the urging of McNamara and Curtis LeMay, who I used to hear him argue with all the time, was to defend capitalism. My grandfather at that time and during the Vietnam War owned digital electronics. And so he, so I know people's attitude about defending capitalism, and part of that is that you need to flood streets with appropriate drugs if that keeps your opponents busy fighting each other, and the other is that if you need to, you can kill like 1 million people if that's what's important. And he did not he had no intention of defending America for democracy. He wanted to defend America for capitalism. He graduated from Harvard Law. He went to Dartmouth. He went to Phillips, Andover.
Well, what should America be defended for?
Well, we certainly should be defended. I have to point out that Dr. James McHenry I'm the first son of the first son of the first son of Dr. James McHenry, started the U.S. military under Adams. He was Secretary of War under Washington, and he was on Washington's staff during the Revolution. And McHenry was advocating that the United States start a military to defend the U.S. from France. Even though he was very close friends with Lafayette, and in fact named his farm after Lafayette outside of Baltimore. But and then they named a fort after him called. He actually was involved in a early weapons procurement scandal where he was able to get a fort built in Baltimore, and then it ended up afterwards being named after him. And then they ended up having his son was at Fort McHenry during the War of 1812, and then they wrote a song called the Star Spangled Banner, and that banner is called the Fort McHenry flag, and it's at the Smithsonian. And so I'm not opposed to the U.S. military existing. It just doesn't have to be half of the income tax that we pay. Not half of the federal budget, but half of the income tax that Americans pay goes to either the current military or to to paying off the debt to past wars.
If you were in charge, how much would go to food and how much would go to bombs?
Oh, I would say since we are the largest military, half of all military on earth is the United States. So we could actually reduce the military by even half would be more, even a few less aircraft carriers and a few less thousands of, half of all the oil that's used by the United States is used by our military. If you want to fight, so you could actually, we're fighting wars in the Middle East for oil using half of our oil. We could actually reduce our need for oil by reducing our military by half. So if you but even one aircraft carrier would be enough to, one less aircraft carrier would be enough to, provide housing for everybody,
Everybody?
That's homeless, yeah. Although we have to point out that there's, people could read that, there's a new book that's out called Home Wreckers, and which I encourage people to read. It's a really interesting book. But, there's abandoned houses all over the United States. There's like several, and some people estimate 20 abandoned houses for every homeless American. So it's a matter of making priorities towards things like education, health care,
okay, so
things like that.
How much of what you do each day is providing food for the homeless, and how much is advocating for them to the various politicos?
I probably spend most of my time on on making sure people have food, and I don't
what I
just
thought,
and I
yeah.
just don't do it here in Santa Cruz. I've been hooking up every day. I got calls from all over the United States for people desperate for food, and I hook them up with their local food not bombs.
I've heard a lot of people say in the last several years that health care is a right, not a privilege. Do you believe that?
Yeah, I do believe that.
So what you must also believe, and I don't mean to be asking leading questions, but it's what it follows, that if you believe that health care is a right, not a privilege, then I'm certain you believe that food is a right and not a privilege.
Yes. And I also believe that housing is a right and not a privilege. And I've had mortgages. I just sold. I lived in a van, in a bus, and a teepee on my land, but I just sold land. So I've had mortgages, and I've, that's how I can rent a little room in Santa Cruz. I sold I was living in my van. My van got trashed actually by some from meth heads, and while it was parked on River Street at an auto repair shop, and my then home was completely destroyed by them. And whoever broke in and trashed my vehicle also stole the ashes of my friend Eric Weinberger and probably injected it into his arms because they were so I'm it's not like all the people living outside are just like wonderful flower children, but they're all somebody's child.
Of course. Well, do you think it's doable? I guess you're saying just about anything is doable, including people who can't earn their own food or earn their own housing should be provided their food and housing by just realigning the priorities a little bit about how money is spent by our government. Is that
correct? So when I started Food Not Bombs, you'd have some homeless people in the south end of Boston. You'd have the Bowery, but homelessness wasn't even a crisis in 1980. But Reagan comes to power and priorities change. And it's through.
Now, wait a second. I remember him coming to power as governor in California, long before he was president of the United States. And the big thing I remember back then, in the 60s, was that he closed a lot of the mental institutions.
Well, I think you and I have spoken about this before, but we have to remember that the mental hospitals were closed by John F. Kennedy. And that was in I forget the exact date, but it's early in his administration because his sister was treated so poorly at the mental hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Rosemary, I think.
Yeah. So then the issue is that it was not really Reagan's idea to close them. He had to close them.
Reagan was blamed for something that he shouldn't have been blamed for?
Correct. This is one of the many urban myths that have persisted. Reagan didn't do that as governor. Where Reagan may be at fault, and many other governors at that time, and also the assassination of Kennedy played a huge role in this. As part of the legislation was that to support states' rights, which was an important issue at the time, should be maybe now even. The states were to fund halfway houses and have this more humane way of dealing with mentally ill people. But there was pushback, and since state legislatures and state governors had the power to fund these programs or not, they did not get funded. And as a result, you get the sense that Reagan was responsible for putting the homeless mentally ill on the streets. But you didn't have massive mentally ill people wandering around in the 60s. You don't start to see that until the very late 70s and into the 80s. And then you start seeing...
And getting more and worse every day now.
Now, correct. Yeah. And that's because our policy... The other thing is that there's a... what's her name? Catherine Fitz. She has, and she used to be the comptroller or a person in, I think a Republican she was hired by a Republican to run
she
HUD.
has a hyphenated name.
Yeah, I forget her.
Austin Fitz.
Austin Fitz, right.
Yeah.
So she actually, if you read her, she has Where the Money Went and these kind of books on that. So and also there's a lot of evidence that basically the HUD money, for instance, that was dealing with public housing and so on, just got diverted off into scams and that people profited heavily and didn't go to housing. And there's $21 trillion that disappeared.
You don't sound anything but sincere to me, and you don't sound like a nutcase. But some of the things you're telling me that are getting me to reflect on the way things are is sort of making me crazy, because I things don't have to be this way, is what it sounds like.
Correct.
And it's all a matter of priorities. We're talking to Keith McHenry, founder or co-founder?
I'm a co-founder. There's
Co-founder of
8 of us.
Food Not Bombs, and is a Santa Cruz resident, has been for many years.
Yeah.
I first met Keith out beside the Santa Cruz post office downtown a few years back, and I saw that he was this Food Not Bombs advocate, because there was a big sign where he was giving food out to people, which is what he does and what the group does. And I asked him, I said, well, where's Robert? And he said, you mean which Robert? And I said, Robert, and now I forgot his name.
Robert Norris.
Yeah, Norris. Yeah. Because I always thought of him as the name, as the go-to person, about representing the homeless. Even though I knew, because years ago, Robert was on this station a lot.
Oh, I'm sure.
Until I think he had something to do with spinning off and starting a pirate radio station, I think.
Yeah, well, that was a wonderful era. So I was involved in starting really what became the national low, micro broadcasting free radio movement. So I had a station with a couple of friends in San Francisco during that time called San Francisco Liberation Radio. And I drove around the North America with the original transmitter that Stephen Dunifer had made.
Okay, I remember that name.
Yeah, so I had the little 5-watt and I would draw. I had one of my tours was called the Renta's Theft Tour, and I would make tofu spread. I dress in a chef's hat, chef's coat, make tofu spread, tell the history of Food Not Bombs as a comedy routine, broadcast it to radios set around the room, and I had the plans on how to make your own FM radio station. And then at the end of it, we would go find an abandoned building. Like, there were millions of buildings left empty by the savings and loan crisis. And then I'd show you how to turn on the electricity and water and squat a building. And I did that in like 50 cities in North America. It was really fun. You were a regular
Abby Hoffman, weren't you?
Yep.
Didn't Abby Hoffman used to do those kinds of things?
Yeah, Abby Hoffman actually featured an action of mine in his last book before he passed called Steal This Urine Test, where I organized...
Steal This Book was the name of a book.
Yeah, that was his first book. And then he had Steal This Urine Test against the drug testing. And we had a thing called the Boston Pee Party, urine for freedom. And we had one of our members of Food Not Bombs was actually a drug tester, and was like, this is ridiculous. I have to say that a certain percentage of people are on drugs, and it's like not even scientific how we're doing urine tests. It's just a nightmare. And so we had this whole protest around that. That was a lot of fun. And he wrote about it and Steal This Urine Test.
I don't remember buying the Steal This book.
No one did.
Oh, really?
I doubt anybody bought it.
But I remember hearing that one of the things in that book was how to make long distance calls for free. Yeah, or how to receive them, if not make them, or something.
Oh no, there was. So the Yippies used to publish, and he was a Yippie. Was I took advantage of this during that period of time, even though I was quite young. They gave out all these codes that they would print up every month of all these different ways to access free long distance calls in their Yippee paper. And then it ended up in the
it
book.
became not an issue, about a generation ago when everything is free. Who would have guessed? I mean, it probably should have been free all along, or next to nothing. Instead of, by the time it got affordable, it was down to a quarter, 25 cents a minute.
Yeah, my toll-free number, which is the hunger hotline.
Which I noticed you still have. That's how I called you.
Yeah.
I Googled or I did a search and to find you. No.
I've had that phone since I faced the California 3 strikes law. It was given to me by an old friend of mine who was selling 800 numbers. And I pay like $10 to $15 a month for that since 1994.
Well, why?
Because any person living on the street can walk up to any payphone and dial it without even a quarter and talk to me.
Do they even have payphones anymore?
There are a few of them.
That work?
Yeah, it still works. I still test it out at the payphone at the post office. Sometimes I'll write my toll-free number on the payphone so people can call me, but then it gets wiped off. But yeah, so for all this time, people...
But don't most homeless people have cell phones where it's unlimited long distance?
Well, the problem for most people living outside is they can't get electricity, so they might have a cell phone, but it doesn't work because they can't charge it.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's just to go back to bring it home to Santa Cruz. There's been a number of city council reports on how to address the homeless crisis, but. And one of them was to have charging stations. That was the 2017 one that Pamela Comstock and then had put together. Talked about having charging stations, having all these different things, which could have been done, but were never done. I mean, there are some more charging stations at the libraries, but otherwise, so every year, every few, like in 2000, there was another study that offered all these ideas, and charging stations wasn't important at the time, so that wasn't included. But, we have these city council things. But I think a lot of local people get the idea that this whole fight is between like Take Back or Santa Cruz Together or Santa Cruz Unite and all this stuff, and it's a little local fight. And I noticed that a lot of my friends would go to city council, like when they were having that vote to censure Chris Crone and Drew Glover, and we want mediation, and we should get the nonviolent communications and so on. But what they're not understanding is that this is not directed by anybody in Santa Cruz. These are the local players of a national anti-homeless campaign. And so if you read like the white papers from the Manhattan Institute or Discovery Institute, or you read the newsletters from the National Association of Realtors and so on, they very clearly talk about this strategy. And even the Democrats in California, the governor's homeless task force is advocating that it's not a civil right to live outside, and that everyone should be forced into camps, government run camps, or into government run shelters. They call it obligation to accept shelter and it's under right to shelter is what it's all this kind of Orwellian twisted language. And that's the Democratic Party in California. And they're mimicking exactly what Trump is talking about. And you have Sinclair Broadcasting running, this so-called documentary, which got blasted by the actual individuals that were featured in it, who were, claimed to have been homeless by Sinclair Broadcasting, but turned out not to be.
Wow.
And it's
we're getting into the meat of what you said would be controversial.
Correct.
And so I'm very,
do we need
very
to go to another break?
But yeah. We haven't had a break at all. But we're going to have a break in 10 seconds.
Okay. Good.
It's the end of the first hour. KSCO Santa Cruz.
6, and the rest of the week's going to be in the low 80s and high 70s. It's now 11:06 and time to return to the Saturday special with Michael Zwerling.
Griffin Queener.
Yes, that's me.
You're a vegan.
Yeah, I am. I am a vegetarian. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait a minute. There's vegan and there's vegetarian.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. I purposely like to say aminals instead of animals. I personally like to say vegan instead of vegan. It's just part of my shtick.
All right.
Cool.
You know, I also, instead of BO, I like to say, no. Instead of deodorant, I like to say deodorant. It's just, just who I am. What the heck? So the reason I brought that up, Griffin Queener,
Okay.
I would normally feel rude here in the studio because I went to my office and opened the fridge I have an office fridge. Pretty cool, huh? And I always have some cold drinks in the office fridge. But just for the heck of it, I opened the freezer part of the little fridge I have there, and I saw a bunch of delicious-looking Angus cheeseburgers that were frozen, and I decided that I had to have one of them. Just by taking it out of the fridge in my office, walking down the hallway, and putting it into the nuke and nuking it in the nuke oven, right? And so I asked the guest, Keith McHenry, if he wanted a nice burger, and he said only if it's vegan. And I said, nope, it ain't. I don't have any veg, but he has. Did you say a whole van load of vegan stuff?
We're gonna give out actually a bunch of vegan burgers today at 4:00 if you want a vegan burger at the downtown post office. And we have it'll probably be again maybe 12-course vegan meal.
Wow.
At the post office.
And anybody can come?
And anyone can eat there.
And you don't have to show a card proving you're homeless?
No. Back in the very beginning, somebody from the federal government in 1980, 81 came to us and said we had to collect the Social Security number of everyone that ate with us so they could deduct that from their welfare check. And we told them we would not be doing that. And we did not do that.
That was big of you.
Yeah, because we're like, the thing is, studies show that about 40% of the food, maybe even 45% of the food, depending on which study you read, is thrown away before it even gets to the plate. It's disturbing how much food is being thrown away, but it's because it is, it's a time-sensitive type of thing, if it
use it or lose it.
Yep, if it's nutritious, the bacteria are going to eat it just as fast as we want to. So
faster,
right?
In some cases, yeah.
We have to race to. So
right.
So there, so that's another byproduct of. So you were asking talk as you were offering me the hamburger. I was saying. One of the reasons that you were saying the Impossible Burger at Burger King was really expensive, and you did decide not to buy it. Well, there's a reason why meat is very inexpensive. There's a bunch of reasons, but one of them is that we as taxpayers we finance the meat industry, and so we do not finance the organic produce industry. We also depend upon, as we could see in those raids at the chicken processing plants in Mississippi, that we rely on undocumented workers who have to accept whatever pay they get and have to work their butts off to make sure we have food. So we have there is that where. If we were to eliminate people that made money less than the minimum wage because they, can be paid that because otherwise they will be deported, we would our meat would be even more expensive. I don't know if you spent any time at a poultry processing plant, but that is one damn brutal thing. We used to have in high school, while I lived in central Utah, our great, beautiful job that we would get once we graduated high school was being at the Norbest turkey processing plant in Manti. And so every year we got a tour we got to meet the gizzard guy and we got to stand in the blood with the necks being chopped off.
Got to?
So it was quite an education. So I became vegan because I had bought a bunch of eggs for my mom. My mom, at that time, we had a family farm on Cape Cod and eventually my mom moved back onto it. And she always wanted to collect eggs, and so I bought 50 unsexed fertilized eggs from Burpees. I was like 16, and it saved me $5. And at 16, that was a huge amount of money. So then my dad one day goes, well, look at now we got 25 roosters and 25 hens, and there's not a hen none of the hens had feathers. You get one rooster per hen. You have naked hens. And so anyway, so the roosters are going to get too tough to eat. We better start killing them. So he showed me how to butcher and 6 roosters and rickety chicken, my sister's favorite hen, who was a deformed leg. So she got to be first. And all the goats freaked out, the cats freaked out. There was like birds flipping out. It was like a massacre. It was like a Hitchcock movie. And I was like, oh my God, they're just not like unfeeling, inanimate objects. So at 16, I became vegan. I wasn't always vegan. I occasionally would dash off into some cheese, like when I was in Geneva or.
Now, be honest. Have you honestly never, since you were 16, consumed non-vegan food?
No, I did. I went to.
Well, I know you. Apart from what you said,
yeah. Then
in other words, if someone offered you a big steak right now, there's just no way in the world.
No way. No. So, I mean, I did meat for a bit when I went to Andrew Wild's clinic after I had fibromyalgia. And Andrew Wild had I was an outpatient at trying to recover from that. And one of his practitioners said, oh, your problem is you don't eat meat. So I ate meat for 6 months. It didn't help me at all. And so I just went back to being vegan.
I see.
And there's a couple of other wild stories. Like I was in Leipzig, Germany, not long after the wall came down, and this family kept offering me sausage, and I could see that it meant a lot to them. And eventually, I ate sausage, got sick. I also was living with some homeless guys in a basement in Bologna, and they dumpster dived all these like wacky sea creatures which looked like space monsters and stuff. And nobody spoke English, and it went on and on that they were insisting I have their food, and I ate that, and that made me really out there too. So I've had some language barrier related meat events.
Look, of course you're going to have outcomes like that.
Yeah,
because you're tempting fate. Now I'm talking about like if I were to invite you to go to House of Prime Rib in San Francisco.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty damn good. I mean, I don't go there very often because I'm at an age where I just can't consume that much meat, but I don't dislike meat, and I don't think it's bad for me. In fact, when I go too much time without meat, I start feeling faint.
Yeah, well, I never feel faint. I actually, when I had my second back surgery, the surgeon was like, wow, why are you doing so well? I say, because I recovered right away. And I attribute that in part to be not only walking all over town with my little walker, but also.
What you mean, little walker?
Oh, they give you a walker at those.
Oh yeah, so you have one of those walkers. You need it from your
I
back surgery?
did back then, yeah,
You don't
but I
now, though.
no, I've totally
Cool.
recovered because I was vegan. I went to to the clinic.
Our Dr. Wallach says no vegan has ever lived to be 100.
I don't think that's true. There's actually, if you look, there's a book on all the people that are 100. There's, I forget the name of it, but it's about different, like in Okinawa, these people.
Okay, we're gonna have to check into that.
Yeah.
We're talking with Keith McHenry, co-founder of Food Not Bombs, and quite the advocate for the homeless. We want to get into a little bit of that today. We're also going to open the phone lines this hour. I almost wasn't going to do that at all because we don't need any phone callers. I think Keith is just such an interesting guest, and the topic is great. But let's do it because
it's fun to get these questions and comments and people deriding me and stuff like that.
But we do have to do this. We really, it's not right unless hour 2 of the Saturday special doesn't feel right until we start it the correct way.
Okay.
Oh, hello, darling. I hate to hang up on you, but I'm sorry, baby, but I have to go. It's time for that wonderful record show. I'd love to visit, but you'll have to call back. KSCO has the inside track.
One of the great things about losing something or forgetting that you have something is how good you feel when you remember it or find it. And that's what happened with me in the burger.
I'm sorry, baby, but I really gotta go to KSCO Radio. Bye.
Herewith is the official welcome to hour number 2 of the Saturday special. We have 2 people on hold already and a third being screened. Griffin Queener. I hope you will screen well today, because we have an excellent topic and an excellent guest, and we don't want to be derailed by callers who go off on tangents. I'm sure this caller won't, because it's Andres who's already sent not one, but I think 3 emails. Andres, you're on the air.
MZ.
Hey, how
Thank
are
you
you?
for taking my call. I'm
You're
doing
bad.
well. How are you?
Good,
Be honest.
and I'm still impressed that you're only 32. You're less than half my age.
That's
Well, it
amazing.
happens.
Yeah.
So I hope this isn't.
I think you're the
derailing.
youngest person who is a regular listener to KSCO. Is there some... I've given Andres awards for being the best caller in a particular Saturday special, on at least 2 occasions. Maybe he deserves to have an award for being the youngest regular listener to KSCO. Is there anybody out there, just before we go into why he called, is there anybody out there listening now who would like to claim that and says it's not fair for me to award Andres that particular award? 479-1080. You can let Griffin Queener know, or you can go on the air if you want. Sorry, Andres. What did you call about?
I called to point out some common ground between both of you guys and a possible solution that maybe you guys could think about. You were talking about housing being all right, and I agree to some degree. Here's how I see it. I think freedom works both ways. I heard him say that housing and food and medicine should be all right, but I think the way he's describing it is the other type of right, the quote-unquote right for, you're entitled to receive this from the government. However, I've heard it argued I've heard it presented that some of the founding fathers wanted medical rights to be in the original Bill of Rights. And if that were the case, there would be a much better open market for remedies and medicine. So taking that into account, if housing was enshrined within the natural rights, I think you would have a better outcome for both sides, both the homeless or people that don't have a house, and also for people on the real estate side. You could do away with a lot of regulations that keep housing from being built. It would open up the market for more housing, and it would also give protections to people who just want to be outside living, as long as they're not, obstructing or whatever, getting in the way of other people's rights. I think, from the two opposing sides, if there was some sort of
Andres, I got to stop you. I should have done it before. Have I given the impression during this program that I'm on the opposite side of Keith? I'm just thinking about what he's saying. I mean, you assume because I'm a real estate investor that I don't think that what he's suggesting is anything but crazy. And the fact is, I'm mulling it over. You've assumed that he and I are on opposing sides on this. I just asked him a question. I didn't argue with him.
I'm not including you necessarily in the opposite side. I'm just saying that there is room for people who might disagree with him. If they look at it from a different point of view, try to understand what he's saying, the needs of the people can be met from a neutral position without having to be, oh, well, it's not your right to ask for free housing. You get what I'm saying? And
I agree with you.
Yeah, that is totally sensible. A lot of the solutions that have been proposed, both by the city council in the 2017 report, and hopefully Cash, the new committee, would actually benefit the people that are really angry that there's so many people living on the streets. Because what would be the thing would happen if you made it possible for everyone that lived outside to have some kind of adequate shelter, which could profit people that are investing in adequate shelter, then there wouldn't be all these people living around outside if you actually provided, if there wasn't like a push to, I remember Dr. Leff was talking to me when he received like money for mental health services in Santa Cruz County. And he was going, it's really frustrating. There's no place to actually place the mental health facilities in the county because there's pushback all the time against that. But then the same people that are trying to stop there from being like a drug rehab place or something like that, any of the things that he wanted to spend the millions of dollars on doing, but couldn't because of opposition for having it placed in the neighborhood, would ultimately, in the end, eliminate the problem for which people are so angry about. And so there actually would be, it would be as if we were to provide, there's so many people come to me and go, I really am sick of dealing with being on heroin, or I'm sick of being on meth. And then I work like my butt off to try to get them into drug rehab, and they can't get in because there's only a very limited number of places. Then the people that are angry that people are leaving needles all around town would not have that as a problem. But at the same time, they're blocking the ability to solve the problem. So there needs to be like a coming together. And I think they're really, I'm finding most people are really supportive of the idea of if there's going to be funding for solutions to do things like take that $25 million and actually put it into drug rehab in the county and actually have a place for that to happen. But, it doesn't happen because, right, like in L.A., they got $2 billion for affordable housing. And somebody's got to build that affordable housing. Those people would make money building affordable housing. There's like all this money would be made by providing affordable housing. Somebody's going to get that $2 billion. But the problem is that nobody allowed the affordable housing to be built in any neighborhood. For 2 years, they haven't built one unit, even though they got $2 billion.
Well, that's what I sure would like to be part of with KSCO, and been a complete failure for almost the first. We're coming up on 29 years of my ownership of the station, and I always thought that it could and should be a wonderful place, a public forum to discuss community problems and their solutions.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't happened thus far. Maybe it's starting to happen now. Maybe.
Yeah, I think they're.
I'd like to think that anyhow.
Yeah, that $25 million would have gone to people building stuff, would have gone to people selling land for that stuff. Then there, when you look at the housing foreclosure crisis, they had a choice, and Obama is really super responsible for this. There was the TARP bailout. You could have actually given that money to homeowners who are facing foreclosure. What do you do when you're facing foreclosure and someone gives you enough money to pay your mortgage? You pay your mortgage. Who do you pay your mortgage to? A bank. So it would have been a twofer. You would have kept people in their houses, and the banks would have got the same billions of dollars in the end. So you wouldn't have had homeless people.
Amazing. Yeah. You're
and
right.
it's
You're absolutely right.
And I was like protesting for that. I was protesting against Clinton when he did away with the Glass-Steagall Act.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
For sure. Yeah.
This is for the guest. Sorry, I forgot your name, but
Keith McHenry.
Keith, if we're dealing with if we're being reactionary about the problems instead of trying to divert to the flow, if we change the ground rules, we wouldn't have to be cleaning up the mess, is where I'm trying to come from. So if some of that $25 million was used instead of cleaning up the mess by creating low-income housing, if some of that money, or I don't know how much money it would take, but if that was focused on changing the rules, like I said, enshrining shelter as a protected human right, so that the dynamics of the ecosystem that we're living in, if those were changed, change the rules around, then everything else would fall into place. You wouldn't have to be building these shelters because shelters would be a right.
Exactly. So that's the thing is that on the one hand, this new idea of the governor's homeless task force is shelter is a right, but shelter really should be homes. So the Union of the Homeless, we have like a couple of sayings. One of them is homeless, not helpless, but the other is saying is like homes, not handcuffs. So there, so the city of Santa Cruz spends $11 million a year, according to the police department's statistics that they gave the city council, on dealing with homeless people, unhoused people. They say half of all the people arrested in the city of Santa Cruz have either a Coral Street address, which means the mission housing, or they don't have an address at all. We also received from HUD $20 million that same year. That's $30 million. And it's year after year after year that we get $30 million to deal with the homeless crisis. Now, if we spent $30 million would actually, somebody, a contractor, Barry Swenson or somebody would get money, architects would get money, they would buy land from somebody that owns land in Santa Cruz, they would build affordable housing, they could do that. We got the $30 million just already what's dumped into the city for the purposes of dealing with homeless people. And that doesn't even include like
Stop squandering it.
Yeah, and
that's your whole point, right?
Yeah, it's going to like crazy things. So what we can see with the $20 million that was allocated for homelessness through the HUD was we got 60 $150 pup tents at 1220 River Street with no shower, no drinking water, some toilets, portable toilets, and that you have to come and go from a van, and you're inside like a cage, and it's hot as it was really unbearably hot in those tents during the summer. Now it'll be cold, but for $20 million, I bought more pup tents than that out of my own pocket and have people in this town. So if I got $20 million, I would do a lot more than buy 60 pup tents.
It sounds like you're describing all the bad things that come with government involvement, and you were describing earlier how they want to make housing compulsory. Can you imagine the hellhole it would create if we went that direction, and how much better it could be if people like you and people that were acting out of their own freedom were just doing their thing, getting along, regardless of government funding? If we just, like I said, enshrine shelter as a human right within our legal system so that they can't put so many rules on where you can be and how you can be.
Yeah, absolutely. There are places. I mean, I lived in Taos, New Mexico, and we, up until recently, until Home Depot and these people like forced stuff on us, we could build houses out of adobe as had been built for the last like 10,000 years. But then, like people wanting to profit off of selling all kinds of crazy building materials were able to buy their way into the state legislature and make it so you take a beautiful adobe building, then you had to put insulation all over the outside of it, and it's been thousands of so I think you're right. There would be there's actually a cob building movement in Santa Cruz right now that's really important. And
Cob, what does that mean?
Yeah, that would be like adobe, although instead of making bricks, you make like the whole walls out of it and stuff. And you want dwellings to be safe so people don't die. But at the same time, there's like thousands of years of humans building perfectly good, shelter without. There's some amazing shelters in this town that are clandestine that people have made that are like works of art that are unbelievable. And so you might consider the people homeless, but actually they do have a home. But I agree that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights actually states that shelter is a fundamental human right, as is food as a fundamental human right, as medical care is a fundamental human right. And so, that by changing our thinking, and like I agree, like changing the law. But, then homeless people are not a protected status, and there's good reasons for that.
You don't need to have protected status. You're a human. That's a human right.
Yeah, that's what. And then you don't need a lot of laws. You have a constitution.
Right. Just put that in there. Put that in there. I heard somebody else talking about freedom of consciousness. There's a senator out there who is wanting to put that in there. The more freedoms that we elaborate in there, the better off everyone's going to be. The less intrusion and corruption that we're going to end up with.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. Good luck, and I hope you can. When you talk about a right, that's your own thing. It's not an entitlement. It's not the government's going to give it to you. It's your ability, your God-given or nature-given right to do what you're meant to do.
Absolutely. I have a short little story to share in that regard. There was some of the same people that are pushing the recall here from Denver, a public relations firm, right?
Why is that true?
Yeah.
People hire public relation firms to get elected. I guess they could hire them to get people diselected.
Correct. Yeah,
right?
yeah. So they were funding and coordinating the opposition to the right to shelter law in Denver, Proposition 300. And the person who they named like Jerryville after this homeless Marine vet that was living outside. And he was like commented to one of our members, he said, they should never put this right to shelter on the ballot, because we already have that right. I'm an American. I live in the United States. I fought for a country. It's the U.S. Constitution. It just we didn't need to have a ballot measure for that right. We already have that right. So I think that's an interesting point.
I think either the 9th or the 10th Amendment says that there are other rights out there that are not enumerated that we have the right to claim. And if we don't claim them, if we don't write them down and make them part of the legal system, then they can get stepped on and the people that enforce the rules, they can take advantage of us not thinking about the rights that we have inherently. So if we don't claim them, they're going to get taken away. And I think it's time to start writing up a few more protections for our freedoms.
Yeah,
on paper.
and we think,
Okay.
and we need to think that we are
This
free.
is a great call. We got a lot of other
Yeah,
calls.
okay,
Almost a
back to-
full
All right,
board.
I'll go.
Thank you,
so much.
Andres. I
That's
appreciate
beautiful.
the call. Stephen Capitol has a question for Keith.
Okay.
Go ahead.
First, I got a quick meat question for MZ first, and then I want to move on to my main topic. MZ, have you ever eaten at Ruth Chris Steakhouse? I've
Yes,
never been
many
able to
times.
pronounce-
Many times.
Okay, is it worth it?
Yeah. It's not a hangout for me, but yeah,
Okay.
if you want to have a really good,
Okay.
I get the New York steak. I think it's better than the fillet.
Very good. Okay, I've lived in Canada 3 different times, both on the west and the east coast and Vancouver Island. And in Canada, housing is socialized, so you really don't see homeless people in Canada unless they want to be homeless. There's just no reason for them to be homeless because they can go into an office and say, I need housing, and if they're willing to sit through the paperwork, they'll be placed. However, there is a filtering process that we would have to have. Otherwise, our housing projects would start to look like Ross Camp. And my point is, I think there's enough money in America where perhaps you could supply housing for individuals that need it. But are they really obligated to have beachfront housing? Could you put housing for them in Salinas Valley or Sacramento or Watsonville? Why do they get beachfront housing?
Well, I don't think anybody's proposing that there be beachfront housing. I think we've made a lot of mistakes in public housing in general, although there's been some positive things. So, for instance, we pick up food twice a month from Nearing Housing, Mercy Housing, and that's mostly Spanish-speaking people, and it's really well designed. It's really organized. They have like a community center, and it works really well. But there could be a lot more of that, and it's as though you're living, as opposed to Cabrini Green, which I visited a number of times, or Columbia Point Housing Projects, which I used to bring food to in Boston, where it's these huge, giant, like 20-story buildings, and then they don't spend any money on maintaining them. They go into disrepair. They become great places like, in fact, when I used to deliver food to Columbia Point Housing Projects, the water and electricity didn't even make it but to the first 5 floors of the 20-story buildings. There was just this huge abandoned, ugly-looking giant brick buildings, and it had gotten to such disrepair that the Black Liberation Army had seized it, and they were running a checkpoint to get in, and you had to negotiate with them to get in to bring the food, and it was totally crazy, wild thing. So it's a wrong way to do housing.
Yeah, those are really great points. That's exactly what I was thinking. There has to be a screening process, or it becomes a 10-story Ross Camp. And the thing about the Canadians is they're just a more civilized people. And the housing projects there tended to be relatively safe and clean and sane. But, you put them up here and, in our region, and I'm just worried about what direction they're gonna go. So I like your observation on a screening process that would keep that kind of housing within code. And I still don't think it has to be on the beach. That people have a right to come here from somewhere else and immediately be housed a mile from the beach.
Well, what do they have the right to? Where do they have the right to be housed if not on the beach?
Well, they have a thing called Mary's Place in Salinas. So you don't build housing in Carmel or Pebble Beach to put the homeless. They have a place called Mary's Place in Salinas. And if someone needs a hot meal, shower, and medical attention, they give them a ride there. I mean, why would they have a right to be in the most desirable property on the coast?
I agree with you, but I still want to see where your head's at anyhow. So
yeah.
we're trying. I'm trying to steer the conversation in the final 20 minutes of the program to solutions.
Yeah, so I think like nearing housing, and a lot. There's problems with the management of of Mercy Housing that people complain about. But of course, a lot people complain about a lot of nothing is necessarily totally perfect, but the thing is, nearing housing, you could actually walk from nearing housing to the boardwalk in like 10 minutes. But you would not say that nearing housing is in the most desirable piece of property in the United States. It's in a swamp, so, and it's next to the sewage treatment plant. But at one point,
that's a swamp that we don't want to drain.
Right. That's the swamp we want to keep. Yeah. And so the thing is that there are definitely possibilities of within Santa Cruz County. And right now, everybody, if you go to Mission Housing, it's very interesting if you help people get housing. So I have a friend, Jeff. We call him Uncle Jeff. He gets his letter for his housing. He's so proud. He shows it to me. And I say, oh, this is great. Let's call this number right now. He didn't have a phone or any ability to do that. I call up, and the woman is so nice, and she's at a place in Watsonville. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry that we send out these, like, the Housing Authority sends out like 10 letters for 2 places, which makes some level of sense. But you have to be one of the first 2 people to get there. And it took him like 2 years to qualify to get this letter. He's living on the streets for years and years now. And then and people get really, it's not a really organized good way of providing housing. It's really limited, and that's what people, when you see the sign out there in front of the homeless service shelter at on 1, it's got 800 people housed. Well, that's over a course of like 6 years, and out of thousands.
Keith, I want to say Keith is an amazing guy. I've talked to him a number of times. I support him. I really like him, and I think there's a reality to what you guys are discussing. I think there's a realistic approach. You're not gonna stick the most. You're not gonna stick people with no resources on at Pleasure Point. There's just
right.
There's no reason to do that, but I would be supportive if you were to put them out on Freedom Boulevard, or, there's lots of property in Watsonville and stuff.
Yeah, well, and we have to, we can remember back with when Ross Dress for Less was a vacant lot, and there was a struggle to put the homeless service center there. But then people felt, well, that's like too in town. Well, let's put it at the edge of town. So they put it across one over on Coral Street, and now that's in town. So it's a lot of times, I
think it needs to go to the Swiss Dairy property, North Coast. What do you think?
Well, there could be there could be all kinds of alternatives like that.
Yeah.
There's also other, there's.
It is 7,000 acres out,
Yeah.
So anyhow,
thank you very much.
I want to thank Steve in Capitola. Yeah. Also, we have Rory up next and Bruce in Los Gatos.
Yeah, thank you.
And Ben in Santa Cruz. We're going to get to all of them. But I want to take a little break here and talk about a follow-up on the Saturday special for September 28th. About 3 weeks ago. I'm reading from the show notes here that our good buddy Dave Michaels writes every week for the Saturday special. Does Google run your life? Zach Voorhees is a former Google employee who blew the whistle on scandalous actions, who joins MZ to share insider information about secret projects, political influence, and future plans of one of the world's biggest tech giants. It's a show that will inform and maybe even frighten you on the Saturday special. That is available on demand at zbsradio.com, at ksco.com, and the most convenient location to play that or any other show that we originate here at KSCO. It automatically gets posted to our archive shows on our KSCO app. So regardless of what kind of a device that you use, if you use an Apple, an iPhone, a Google Android, what do you call it? The Apple Pad, you know, the what's it called? iPad Pro or iPad not Pro. We have free apps that you can download to give you anything that we have ever done on KSCO in the last several years. Now they don't all have show notes like this, and we're going to try to fix that here because, you know, if we want to move ahead in this vastly changing communications world, we damn well better have show notes for all our archives. Doesn't do any good to archive the shows if there's no show descriptions,
right.
So it's not searchable,
right?
It's all there, but it's not searchable, and we're going to have a meeting with our staff, and we're going to try to fix that serious problem. But anyhow, just for those of you, we've received many requests for a rerun of that program. We always rerun the Saturday program the same night at 10 p.m. to 12 midnight, as we will tonight for this show. But I just want to remind people that they can get anything they want if on demand, and we probably will replay that show with where I interviewed Zach, the Google whistleblower. I have been texting him to let him know that he was one of the most popular guests and topics we've had in years on the Saturday special. And he said, "Who is this?"
Oh, that's so funny. Well, you know, Google has a big influence on this whole housing crisis here in Santa Cruz.
What?
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, because, you know, like a lot...
because of so many of the workers here.
Yeah.
And they bid up the housing prices.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Okay, for sure. So I reminded Zach who I am, and he said, "Oh, yeah, for sure." So he lives in San Francisco, and I spend, I don't know, half the time in San Francisco. So hopefully he and I are going to reconnect because I really am fascinated by what he does. They've picked him up on Breitbart. He's apparently going to be on with Glenn Beck in a couple of days here, and I want more of him I want to, you know, be in the loop here with him.
Yeah, we should get some Facebook people on.
Yeah, because this guy is from the inside, and he was never political. But boy, when he realized the insidious nature of what's going on, it's insidious not because of what their politics are. It's insidious if they were conservative, which we all know they're not.
Right.
You know, at Google or these high-tech companies, but they try. And I've said, as a major, unapologetic Trump supporter, that actually surprises some people. People say, "Oh, I had no idea MZ really likes Trump." He's the greatest. He's the absolute greatest there has ever been. I can't imagine a better president than Donald Trump. But anyhow, okay, you and I might get into it on that. But in any case, what am I saying here? Trump, geez, I was on a roll here, and now I got knocked off. Anyhow, as a Trump supporter, I believe that there is no way that he won't get reelected in probably one of the biggest landslides.
I 100% agree with you.
In the history of our country. However, there is one thing that has me a little concerned, and that's what Zach Voorhees brought up here on the Saturday special, and that is Google has got Donald Trump in their crosshairs, and they are not happy about where things are. They will not be happy until he is not president anymore. And if there is anybody or anything that could manage or upset or drive the election, it could be managing or manipulating the thoughts of people who are not particularly political, you know.
All right.
with their search engine, things and so forth. So I'm just fascinated by this subject. And yes, what Dave said in the show notes of the Saturday special from the end of last month, it's scary. It's really, really. I don't know where you stand on Trump, but do you agree with me that a tech company that's so powerful like Google, how do you stop them from influencing people because they're so big and powerful?
Yeah, well, I think we are in a crisis with both Facebook and Google, or like in Amazon, have such massive control over the minds of Americans. It's incredible. But I do also agree that Trump is likely to win. I think the Democratic Party will choose somebody.
Self-destruct.
Yeah, they're going to choose somebody that no one really wants, but people that support Trump are going to be out there on the corners with their signs. They're going to be mobilized. They're going to be out there, and like if I don't think Joe Biden will probably get, but imagine if Joe Biden becomes the Democratic candidate, people are going to go, oh yeah, whatever. So disliking Trump is not a political platform.
Right on.
That's exactly
Keith.
That's exactly what happened before.
Right on. And they're trying to make it one.
Yeah, and it's not.
And they're going to fail.
Anybody but Trump is not a political strategy.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Next caller, Rory in Watsonville. Question for Keith. Go ahead, Rory.
Yeah, Keith, I saw you briefly there at the station. Just quick question. How do you make a living these days?
Well,
If I can ask.
Yeah, you can ask. So what I do is I still speak at colleges. I also sell my books, and I sell paintings, and I live marginally.
Do you have any residual from the McHenry family trust?
There was never a McHenry family trust.
Okay.
And there's no connection between you and Chancellor McHenry, right?
There is so Dean was a distant cousin.
Oh, really?
And my family actually lived up on the top of I had my first birthday here at my grandparents', and they were on the top of the hill above Los Gatos. But that side of the family became, were park rangers for my father was a park ranger, my grandfather was a park ranger, I was a park ranger, and seasonal back when I was in college. But yeah, there's no family trust or any of that.
Okay. I just was wondering. I did want to make a comment that we're a representative republic. We have a free market economy. Yes, there is a 9th and 10th Amendment that talks about things not stated in the Bill of Rights. They're not enumerated or reserved for the states. So states can do certain things on their own. They don't have to wait for the feds either way. But, when you get into this homeless thing, so-called, or bum, so if they're homeless, I'm bumless because I have to earn a living to take care of my family, keep a roof over my head, and I get up every day. I don't, I did drugs when I was a kid in high school very stupidly, but I stay away from that. I have to make decisions every day, and it takes time. That's 4 decades since I got out of school almost. And so my recompense is now I got to look out for these deranged alcoholics that decide they want to come to California and live on the coast. And I say no. Build them a tent city in Trona, California, or somewhere in the high desert, low property values. Get them the mental health they need. Reopen mental hospitals. And get these guys dried up or send them home to their home state. Let their families deal with them. This is ridiculous that we sit around here with all these crazy ideas, or we're going to build this for the homeless, that for the homeless, in the most prime real estate area on the coast of California. It's nuts. And Keith, nice a guy as you are, I wouldn't put you in charge of anything because you just jump from one idea to the next. You've always got an answer for everything. You're all over the place. You're almost impossible to pin down. And it's like, why don't you earn a living and go give your money to the homeless, build houses for them, and figure it out on your own. Don't come to me, the taxpayer. So that's all I got to say.
Okay, I want a couple of things. Of course, many homeless people work, In fact, many homeless people work 2 and 3 jobs, but they cannot afford housing. Second of
well, they need to move. They're in the wrong place.
well, many
That's
of them.
simple.
Well, they were born here, so a lot of the people.
Well, that's not a guarantee. Look, I'm running a job in the Central Valley. People are coming doing piecework, trimming strawberry plants. They show up at 5 a.m. and they kick ass for 8 hours. Piece rate. They're making $200 to $300 a day because they hustle. And there's no reason why native-born Americans couldn't do that work. So when I see people from other countries that have the desire and the hunger to work and take care of their families, they're not looking for handouts, drive crappy cars, okay, live in they'll travel 45 minutes just so they can live in a cheaper area to live, even in the Central Valley. There's no excuses, Keith. These people that are mentally deranged, that have used drug and alcohol for years, need critical, special medical help.
I think we're all on the same page there.
Yeah.
Rory,
Anyway,
hate to do this, but yeah, we got 2 other callers here that I want to get to in about 3 minutes. Go ahead, Bruce. Bruce in Los Gatos.
Hi. You can change the subject just barely. I think, and just me, but my feeling is that government is not the solution. There's a problem, there's no question of it. But if government would get out of the way, the rest of the world could do a hell of a lot to take care of the problem. And another.
Are you irritating your dog? Because the dog won't stop barking, and he's louder than you are.
There's a government employee at your door trying to deliver some mail.
Oh, okay.
No, she thinks she owns the street out there.
Okay.
And it might be the government employee that's working on it, but she's definitely working on taking care of her street. Anyway, there are, I think, several hundred very usable buildings on Fort Ord that are boarded up and totally abandoned. Why couldn't the homeless go there?
Well, I will tell you.
What a great idea.
Government
Go ahead, Keith.
they get in each other's way.
Yeah, so let me.
Somebody else's turf.
Let me tell you, there was a law called the Stewart-McHenry Act, and those buildings were supposed to be given to organizations to house the homeless. And that's a federal law that still exists to this day. And I was arrested repeatedly trying to enforce that law in the 90s. And I took over with Religious Witness with Homeless People, and I started a movement called Homes Not Jails. And we tried first to get HUD to provide those buildings, and they wouldn't, and they don't. And that's a federal law that's
We're going to have to come back to that. I wish it wasn't the end of the program. Thank you, Bruce in Los Gatos, for calling. Our last caller is going to be Alicia, co-chair with a guest calling from Santa Cruz. Go ahead, Alicia, you're on. But you only got a minute.
Hi, Keith.
Hurry, you've only got a minute. Hurry up.
Yes, but a lot of these things that are said about the homeless are designed to stop the solutions from being able to happen. They're scare tactics. The solutions are available and they're in place, but some of the things that these last callers said are designed to scare you. We need to steer clear of labeling all the homeless as drug addicts. A lot of them have master's degrees. They're educated. They work. We don't need to place them, next to some water facility or in some industrial area. They are your former neighbors. They're your neighbors now. We need to change the narrative around the look of homelessness and how they are treated. We need dignified solutions.
Wow, what a great way to end the show.
I hope that I got that in there. Thank you.
You sure did. Thank you so much,
Alicia.
God,
you.
She's brilliant.
And she's the president of the Santa Cruz Union of the Homeless.
Wow. Okay, that's great. Keith McHenry, thank you very much for being with us. We didn't solve it all, but we're on the way.
Yes.
We've got to have you back.
Thank you.
That's all, folks.
KSCO, Santa Cruz, Salinas, Monterey, San Jose. Stay tuned, 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 Jose. Stay tuned,